Thank you very much, Wade. And forgive me if I look a little bit like a question mark here. It's not some form of symbolism to the topic at hand, but rather from shoveling snow at the end of the driveway this morning. If we just sort of comment a little bit in terms of this topic and the motivating factors surrounding the selection of this as the topic for this, this inaugural feature. There are two really motivating factors that stand out to me. The first, in the fall, as all of you are aware, we went through a period here where the value of this university and the value of a university degree from UPEI was being questioned. It forced us, I think, to really question the concept of quality and what constitutes and distinguishes high from low quality. And to me, integrity really is a central component or tenet of any discussion of quality. The second motivating factor occurred in mid-August of 2010, so a month and a half into my term as Vice President Academic, and it was really my first exposure to the media here on the island. I was asked by CBC to respond to an article on the incident of academic dishonesty at Canadian universities. Unfortunately, our registrar was away at the time, and so I had to deal with this without her assistance. And I was asked about, well, what are our experiences at UPEI in terms of incidents of academic dishonesty? And I found out that although the reported number of incidents as measured by the number of files that are in students, or number of letters that are in students' files, are relatively low, there actually is quite a degree of variation across the faculties and schools. And even more so, and obviously I didn't say this as part of my media interview, although it's captured right here now, is the fact that I think I found informally when I started asking around that there was a fair degree of what I would call disquiet, or maybe even a bit of discomfort around the topic. And I would almost even go as far as to say cynicism on the part of some about the process and the reporting of how we deal with sort of academic dishonesty. And it started me thinking once again that this is really sort of a big issue for universities. It's something that we as a university and that all universities should really be addressing and having a sort of a perhaps even an impassioned type of talk about. So let's make sure I've got this right here. Just a few of the topics. You'll see that I almost go back and forth between discussing academic integrity at that high level and talking about some elements that constitute perhaps an absence of academic integrity, that being sort of dishonesty. And hopefully you'll forgive me for going back and forth here. By the end, I hope it'll all sort of make sense. What I'd like to start with in this talk is to set this into the context of some terms and definitions, and I don't want to bore you with a lot of the definitions, but just so that we've got some sense of what we're talking about here. UPEI, if you look at our calendar, if you look at on the website, we actually don't define academic integrity per se. Instead, what we do is we define academic dishonesty. And forgive me for saying this, but we almost define it as sort of the counterpoint or the opposite, really, of academic integrity. But we define academic dishonesty not really by defining it by stating it as a series of examples. So, for example, plagiarism, cheating, falsifying records. And so I just bring that to your attention to give you some idea of sort of the status, at least at one level, of how we treat or don't treat the concept of academic integrity. One definition of academic integrity, and if you go on sort of the web, you'll see a number of these, comes from the Center for Academic Integrity at Clemson University, actually, and it's as you can see here on the slide, it's a commitment, even in the face of adversity, to 5 fundamental values. Honesty, trust, fairness, respect, and responsibility. And so you can see here that we're, at least in terms of this definition, we're really talking about that high-level understanding of what this concept actually means. And clearly it's an idealized or ideal definition, and it really doesn't refer to punishment at all. So that's why I say we have to make that distinction between discussions of dishonesty, academic dishonesty, and examples of academic dishonesty, and this broader topic of academic integrity. And if you start looking at a number of websites, and there are a number that are under the University of Alberta website that you can see, and I'll point that out to you now, and I'll point it out later. It actually has an excellent website on aspects of academic integrity and aspects of dishonesty as well. There are a number of terms that come to mind that I think we've all heard, but I don't know how many of us have actually given a lot of thought or attention to the meaning of these terms, or much less whether we've been able to convey those to our students or had discussions on them. So just some of those terms, like concept of common knowledge, or plagiarism, or even cyber plagiarism that you hear in some settings now. And there's also a distinction that's sometimes made between unintentional plagiarism and deliberate plagiarism. So like my topic, it's not easy often to understand these without a lot of time, with a lot of thoughtful reflection. So what are some of the statistics? If I could set this in the context, and this is really the entry point for that CBC interview, really, that they picked up from a paper that was written by a staff member at the University of Guelph in partnership with one of the leading academics in this area in the United States. Some of the statistics on the forms of academic dishonesty in Canada. Now remember here, as I think I've already alluded to, that these are really, or measures of dishonesty are really markers or indicators of the principle of, or better, the lack of academic integrity. And so this study that was undertaken was really on the incidence of forms of academic dishonesty at Canadian University by McCabe and Christensen in 2006. And they surveyed nearly 20,000 students at 10 universities and 1 college in Canada. In this survey, they looked at a number of students, both those going into first year across the entire undergraduate set of programs, as well as graduate students. And so, for example, they found that 73% of first-year students reported committing 1 or more serious acts of academic dishonesty while in high school, and nearly 60% admitted serious acts of cheating on tests in high school. It's also important to look at how students perceive different forms of academic dishonesty. So among undergraduate students, right across these 11 post-secondary institutions, 53% of the undergraduates admitted to serious cheating on written work, and 18% admitted to serious test cheating. And of course, I'm not going to get into the details of what constituted their definition of serious in both of those cases, but I think it's a good indicator. And I think we're all aware that this is self-reported. And I think if we actually looked at this in a different way of examining this, I wouldn't say even any more objective or any less subjective, we might find that these values might even be higher. What I haven't put on this slide here is that they also looked at graduate students and asked them for their attitudes or their incidents of what we would call cheating or serious academic offenses in written work. And they reported that 35% of graduate students surveyed admitted to serious cheating on written work, and 9% admitted to serious test cheating. I won't go into the details, as I said, on the definitions, but this and other surveys in the United States tell us that academic dishonesty is widespread and that we're fooling ourselves when we think that is not taking place in our campus. One other point in terms of the graduate students, one of the more disquieting points about this is that many of those graduate students are the ones that maybe are TAs or are graders that we rely upon as faculty members to be the direct graders of essays or assignments for undergraduate students. So the next one, why is this important? Why is academic integrity so important? I think that really comes back, to the purpose of higher education. And what I've done here is I've separated out, and this is clearly a very, I'm just generalizing here in terms of the phases or stages of universities, and I apologize in advance for that. But for my purposes, it's convenient to do that for this topic. I've looked at this in terms of sort of almost a traditional period of universities, a modern and what might be referred to as a postmodern era of universities. And a traditional, we have sort of this phrase in loco parentis, or in the place of the parent, where universities were really expected to be shepherding students. They were there in order to, and you, as parents, you sent your sons and daughters away often for the entire year, and you expected that institution, that university, was going to care for them. This wasn't necessarily just to impart disciplinary knowledge. This was a very broad mandate and a very broad role that the institution and the faculty members and the staff were playing. If we look at this in terms of a modern era, I think disciplinary content has become much more critical, significant. Imparting that disciplinary content, making sure that students know and understand what there is being conveyed in a set of disciplines. I think the ideals and the values that I talked about in terms of a traditional university were supposed to be realized indirectly or learned indirectly or even through osmosis. And I think back to my early years of being an assistant professor, and especially teaching first-year classes. When I first started, the first classes I went into in the first-year classes, the students, I started by saying that I won't be checking attendance, that I said that I expect all of you to be your big boys and your big girls now, and you can set your own priorities. I look back at that now, and I realized that I was probably wrong in terms of making some of those statements. Because I think I was abdicating, because I was probably thinking it much more in terms of, as a junior faculty member, imparting that disciplinary knowledge, not thinking about it in terms of that broader role I had as a role model, or as a mentor for those smiling faces, sometimes not smiling faces, in front of me. I now realize that I said that I was really abdicating that responsibility to instill a system of values that's consistent with the beliefs of my university at the time, that was consistent even of professional research and even of the society within which I lived. I think most of us realize that this model, the model that described of a modern university, really doesn't describe the context of many public universities in Canada today. There have been many changes taking place in the roles that universities are expected to play. And I think it's very simplistic as well, even in terms of how we can picture what our student body is. Especially in how it conveys the student body both as individuals and as a group. Now, as I say, I think we might want to call the era that many universities are in right now to be sort of a postmodern era. In addition to disciplinary content, universities are expected to impart things like critical thinking skills, the importance of civic society, literacy, numeracy, the importance of lifelong learning, or to impart the love of learning, and leadership. So it doesn't take much of a stretch to think of academic integrity as one of this bundle of broader character traits that we're expected to impart to the students that sit in front of us in the classes. In fact, we've even started reaching into the high schools, so we partner with the departments of education and others to recognize that the student doesn't just start their first day here and end 4 years out, but rather there's a continuum that we have to be aware of. And I think we also, as part of this postmodern university, need to affirm the shared values, including this sort of commitment to honesty and the pursuit of truth. So, as I said, that's a very generalistic perspective, but I think it describes, at least in terms of my own career, some of the changes I've seen in myself and seen in universities over that 25 years or so that I've been associated with universities in Canada. The next slide, I just want to pick up now I'm going to move back really to plagiarism, this concept of plagiarism. And a number of these points come from that site that I mentioned at the University of Alberta that was quite good, including sort of these categories of reasons for plagiarism. And when they look at plagiarism, they actually divide it into 4 different distinct categories of reasons why students may tend to plagiarize. The first they talk about are the so-called writing and research skills by students. And what they really mean here is that students have not yet learned some of these basic writing and research skills. So, for example, they may not understand how to search the library for sources. They may not know how to evaluate internet sources. So they may not actually have a sense of quality control when they're looking for source material on the internet. They may confuse the terms plagiarism and paraphrasing. And they may even be confused about terminology. There are some that may practice careless note-taking, so that when you take notes in preparing for a paper, you may actually get confused from the point you're taking notes to the point that you're actually writing the final paper. So that's actually a skill that takes time and effort to learn. And in fact, they often might have difficulty and get confused about the style for citing sources. And we actually have responsibility there, because you have a student that might be taking 10 courses spread across several faculties and several disciplines and departments that are very different styles, citation styles. And you can imagine how that might confuse students. Once again, in my days, if I could call on my own experience as an undergraduate student, it wasn't really until, and I'll admit this here, it wasn't really until the second or third year of my undergraduate education that I really started to understand how research was carried out and what it really meant to synthesize the work of others into some coherent whole with a willingness and the ability to comment on this synthesis. So I can understand the difficulty that students are really facing as they're going through this evolution in their knowledge, and not just in their knowledge, but their way of examining knowledge. A second category of reasons why students plagiarize that's provided out of the University of Alberta are misunderstandings regarding key concepts. So they may not understand what plagiarism actually means, or common knowledge, or public domain. Or they may have the perception that online information is public knowledge just because it's accessible to everyone. A note, by the way, this is not just for students. I think there may be some of us as faculty members that have perhaps a lack of understanding of some of these terms as well, and we may convey inaccurate or misleading information to students. A third set of factors that they use to try to explain why plagiarism exists is in terms of this set of external factors. And this can come everywhere from pressure from family, and competition for scholarships or jobs. And what this really speaks to in part is that the means justify the ends, where the ends may be defined very differently between ourselves and by students. And what it really suggests as well is that in some cases, learning in the minds of some of our students may not necessarily be the point of an education, but the point, and once again, I'm generalizing here, but the point may be to get a piece of paper that qualifies you for a job. So when the grade becomes the goal, then behavior that you and I might view as unethical may become ethical to them. And learning and the evaluation of learning are sometimes also considered one rather than two distinct processes. We sometimes hear about the concept of the commodification of knowledge and education. And that's also a part of one of the factors that's within this bundle as well, where some students might view education as a commodity, where learning is solely done so that the career aspirations can be fulfilled. And I think there's always an element to this, so we can't necessarily view this as a completely wrong thing to do. In fact, we often are trying to link the two as a mechanism to show students that there's a career after many non-professional degree completions. A fourth bundle of factor, or what I would call internal and what they would call internal factors, and I've just given a couple of examples here of poor time management and organizational skills. And the fifth is actually what I would actually think as other external factors. And these are sort of external contextual factors like the cultural factors. The example they give at the University of Alberta is that many non-Western cultures view copying someone else's work as a form of flattery. And the idea that words can be owned is sometimes viewed as a more westernized type of concept. Finally, I think we need to look at the broader societal context within which our educational system exists. And this may also be part of that external external factors category. I think we all have to, we look at the daily news and we see examples, for example, of integrity or lack of integrity in corporate behavior, questions regarding the link between clinical researchers and private companies, where we start questioning ourselves, and it's no wonder that our students start questioning where the ends justifying the means is reinforced in the minds of many of the students that sit in our classes. So why are we reluctant as an academy, and why are we reluctant as individuals to perhaps report dishonesty and report plagiarism? I think several surveys, especially in the United States, of faculty in the US and in Canada, show that a large percentage of faculty admitted to either ignoring incidents of suspected academic dishonesty, and there's a 2005 article by McCabe that speaks to this as well. There was also a study of 9 campuses done at Rutgers University of 800 professors that found that 54% of them seldom reported cheating, 40% had never reported cheating that they encountered, and only 6% had often reported cheating that they encountered. And there are a number of reasons that have been given here, and you can probably think of some yourselves, of why that has taken place. For example, there's a perception out there that the process of the review is often tedious, is time-consuming, and is often not supportive of faculty members. There's also a suggestion sometimes that the punishment doesn't fit the crime. So, for example, there may be the same punishment meted out, regardless of the severity of the action. There are some faculty, I believe, who feel that by reporting this and seeing this through to conclusion, you might damage the student's reputation or career aspirations, and they'd rather confront the student informally themselves. And that's fine in some cases, and in fact, we've encouraged that as part of our own regulations. But this actually leads to faculty thinking of this as a one-time offense, as opposed to looking at this as a record both of the student, but a record of the institution as a whole. Another one is that it's often perceived that examples of academic dishonesty are very difficult to prove and prove right through that system. Some universities will find that across the faculties, across the schools, and even across departments, they have a very different set of policies. So it's inconsistent in terms of how they deal with plagiarism. And that often leads to confusion among some faculty. And finally, faculty are often unaware, perhaps, of the root causes and mechanisms to prevent dishonesty, or they don't believe that it's their role to educate students on these issues. And it gets back to that point of perhaps the nature of a modern university versus a postmodern university. So let's look at this in terms of 3 groups of actors, if you want to call them that, at a university. And it could be this university, it could be any university. And the first are what I would call sort of faculty responsibilities. And what I'd like to do is sort of there was an article written by Karen Close where she and others have talked about this as well, that there's no quick fix, if you want to call it that, about addressing issues of academic dishonesty and instilling these principles, this principle of academic integrity. I think we all are aware as faculty that we have a role to play in becoming better educated on the subject. And hopefully talks like this and dialogues within the campus will help to do that. But research shows that one of the factors that encourages plagiarism is when students believe that their instructors are indifferent to it. So if we actually convey or project that indifference, it's understandable that there will be a culture of acceptance of dishonesty within an institution. The other thing is, in terms of responsibility as faculty members, is that we have to hold ourselves to the same standard we expect of our students. We have to design, model, and clarify expectations and the regarding collaboration. So, for example, it's been shown that faculty and students have sometimes have a very different conception of the value of individual versus collaborative work. And they find it very difficult to understand. Students, in this case, find it difficult to understand why sharing information or ideas is inappropriate in some circumstances. We have to continually revise our forms of assessment. And it almost seems natural to us as faculty members that we don't use the same form of assessment, in fact, even the same test, year after year. But we have to make sure that we are very much aware of what we're doing and keep our own integrity. Make sure we're aware that we have a commitment to make to integrity here as well. And this partly is in keeping with reducing the opportunities or the temptations for students to engage in forms of academic dishonesty. And when I think of this, I think of that kid in the candy shop. If we're not aware of the temptations we're placing in front of students, we shouldn't be surprised, in fact, when some students are prone to exhibit forms of academic dishonesty. So this also means that we don't ignore examples of dishonesty when you see it. And this is part of getting back to teaching those core values. Ignoring it, as I've already alluded to above, sends the message that it is acceptable. It also cheapens the value of the work being done legitimately by others and reduces the faith that students place in the values and the virtues of the institution. And I've got a quote here by Mackenzie in the late 1990s where she says, it's reckless and irresponsible to assign research projects that are ill-defined and vague. And she uses the phrase, the go find out about it types of papers that invite those types of papers that are submitted from paper mills, for example. I almost said puppy mills, but they're quite different, by the way. On the surface, I think it encourages students to go to these paper mills, but more fundamentally, it places little thought or value on the exploration of original thought, on questioning, and on synthesis. So if we look at the responsibilities of students here as well, they also have to take responsibility. And there's some interesting work that's emerging in the United States, especially on students and the role of students in academic integrity. There are many who believe that students actually should take a primary role or responsibility for academic integrity. And I'll talk about this in just a moment, there's this movement for the development of not just honor codes, but sort of modified honor codes, where in fact students do have primary responsibility for monitoring and assessing incidents of academic dishonesty. And what this points to is that it's not a top-down process by any means, where it's student-driven and where we actually as institutions and as faculty members have to be willing to give up some of the control that we have over that process. As students, I think it's important for us and for you to educate yourselves on terms and definitions, and also to not ignore unethical behavior in others. That means talking to the students themselves, and perhaps even more sort of threatening to students to talk to instructors or colleagues. And finally, let me just bring up the university responsibilities. Now, I think we at UPI and other universities are already doing a lot in this area. So for example, the library on the Moodle page, there's already a quiz and a tutorial on what constitutes plagiarism. I know the Webster Center already does a lot of things. In fact, I know when I was doing my preparation for the interview in mid-August that there are a lot of faculty and departmental specific types of exercises in introductions to concepts of what constitutes academic dishonesty and to a lesser extent integrity. But I believe that our university and all universities have other responsibilities to play as well. I think it's responsible for us to streamline the process as much as possible and make it consistent and clear for faculty and for students. I think we have a responsibility as a university to educate ourselves and to others on what integrity means and what dishonesty is in its many forms. And that means not being passive about it by just mentioning it in core syllabi, but rather being engaged with students about what this means. It also means not being solely punitive when you talk about academic dishonesty or integrity. I think we also have a responsibility as a university to recognize and affirm integrity as a core institutional value. And finally, I think we as faculty, students, and administration have a shared responsibility. And that is an interest in academic integrity, where the nature of the growth of knowledge means that we're building on the work and ideas of others. It's important for me as a faculty member to convey this, and a researcher as it is for students to understand this as well. If I could just give you sort of some concluding remarks here. First of all, as I've alluded to, there are a number of resources here that you can go to. It doesn't take very much searching to find out. There's a lot that's been written on this. I made reference to the Center for Academic Integrity at Clemson. I also made reference to our own Moodle platform as well. There are a number of universities that are like UPEI that have tutorials on academic integrity. York's is one that I found very quickly. I've made reference to the University of Alberta's webpage on this. One of the most quoted articles was that written by Bill Taylor, an emeritus professor of political science from Oakton Community College in Des Plaines, Illinois, entitled Academic Integrity, A Letter to My Students. And it's an open letter, and he's given permission to repeat that and copy that wherever we want to. And I'll see if I can put that on a site for you to look at as well. It's an interesting article because it's a short 4 or 5 page article that talks about not just student responsibility, but his responsibility as a faculty member to his students at every stage in the creation of that class and the completion of the class. Another one that you should be aware of is an article by Pavella and McCabe called 10 Updated Principles of Academic Integrity, How Faculty Can Foster Student Honesty, in the 2004 issue of the Change Journal. Just my final message here. This fall, in this very room, as a matter of fact, our president used the phrase raised expectations. To me, raised expectations has a personal meaning. It means how can I do my job to the best of my ability, and how can I make a difference in the lives of those around me? Raising expectations is not just about getting the next paper published. It's not about getting the next grant. It's not even about increasing our enrollments, although all of these things are important. To me, fostering the growth of a culture of academic integrity is one of the key tenets of raising expectations. Thank you very much.